Welcome to the Friday Power Lunch, a weekly show amplifying the voices of the Virginia grassroots. Each week, we provide engaging conversations about politics, culture, and women making change. Produced by the unstoppable women of Network Nova, our motto is, when we vote, we win. The Friday Power Lunch is recorded before a live Zoom audience. Follow us on social media. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and show us some love and become a sponsor through Patreon. The Friday Power Lunch. Badass women getting things done.
It's August 26th. Welcome to the Friday Power Lunch. I'm Catherine White, your host, bringing you the guests, the issues, and the action, amplifying the voice of the grassroots to get things done and, hey, to make politics fun. And today's theme is Battle to Save Democracy. We have two fabulous ladies for justice who will speak on what's at stake in this critical battle to save our democracy and the ways we can continue to fight for equality and justice that Lady Liberty promises. So let's welcome our guests. First up, I'm so excited to welcome DAHLIA LITHWICK, Canadian-American lawyer, writer, journalist, and currently the senior legal editor at Slate and host of the extremely popular podcast that I love and listen to all the time, Amicus. It's about the courts and the law. And today, DAHLIA, what is Lady Liberty saying over there?
Well, I think Lady Liberty is probably weeping right now, but it just means, as your awesome little song reminded us, that it's our job to fix it.
That is true. I'm so glad that you agreed to come on. We're really excited to talk to you. I know everybody in the room is thrilled to have you here. So I'm so glad. So stay in your seat and get ready. We're going to have a lot of fun, and we will be playing some great games today as well for Liberty. All right. So next up, we need to talk about the solution in the courts to this. So I'm so excited to have Liz Frost here, Litigation Chair and Partner at Elias Law Group. You are literally in this battle every day, and you're in your new office doing it.
Yeah, it's very exciting. We launched this firm almost a year ago this month.
Nice.
We are the largest pro-democracy law firm in the country. We're a mission-oriented firm, and here we are in our new office.
Here we are, and I can't wait to talk to you, because I think DAHLIA also, we're going to be excited to hear about that, because we definitely wanted to balance today with, who is out there fighting for us in the courts, where we think this is the battlefield. So thank you, Liz, so much. So let's get to the rules of the road before we get going with our great guest today. And if you're new to the show, we have Michelle McKinney up there. Michelle, give a wave. She's our chat liaison. So if you're new, you can just message Michelle. She'll let you know what to do and what the heck's going on. And remember, we're a friendly community, so use the chat to communicate, share your thoughts. But if you get nasty, stare over there. Our bouncer will bounce you right out. And that's her job, and she's pretty tough. So, don't mess with her. And our favorite part of the show is the after chat. And that means that after the show, which I'm going to warn you, it's going to go long today, a little bit probably, come in and stay with us, because we get to unmute and just really chitty chat away and share all kind of great ideas. And we'll talk about the show in that after chat. And lastly, but most importantly, investing in women doing the work, and we are. So become a patron of the show. We love it, and you can get a lovely mug. I think, Stair, we have some. So today, if you want to become a patron, you will get a Friday Power Lunch mug, and it's really easy. $5, $10, $25 a month. You could support our work, and we are well worth it. And one last thing, remember, there's no show on Labor Day because we're going to be getting out the vote, but we will be back on September 9th with a show all about labor. So you won't want to miss a thing. And so it's my pleasure to bring up the big boss, the leader of the Virginia Grassroots Coalition, Louisa Borowski. Hello, Louisa. Give us an update.
Oh, it's great to see you. We missed you last week, Catherine. And so the obviously big news today is it is Women's Equality Day, and we want to encourage you to share social media posts and messages on Facebook. And so we've got some samples for you, which I'm going to be putting in the chat. And it's really important that we're bringing up both the importance of women's equality, but also the fact that there is not equal access for women today. So a lot of these messages are about the inequality that women are facing. And we want to bring this up and remind people that we still have to fight, right? And it's not just women who have to fight, all of us have to fight, because women's equality is important for everyone and is important for our country to be successful. So Women's Equality Day is the first one. But then coming up on September 7th, as I mentioned last week, we are going to have a special session, and we are anticipating that Governor Youngkin is going to try to take away additional women's rights by passing a 15-week abortion ban. So I am encouraging you, if you can, to go down to Richmond on September 7th to rally in person. But if you're not able to do that, please sign up for Planned Parenthood's Legislative Rapid Response Team listserv. What that is going to do is give you updates on ways that you can contact your legislators, and probably also post on social media to make sure that there's a real uproar on the 7th, so that the governor understands that this is not something that Virginians want. He might want it, but 70% of Virginians support abortion rights. So there's no reason that we should be allowing our governor to pass a bill like that. And then the last thing I want to do is remind you that we have a great opportunity to support one of our wonderful women in Congress. On Saturday, we're having our big grassroots canvas for democracy. We're going to be out on the doors to support Jennifer Wexton, and it's going to be such a fun event. So if you have not already RSVP'd, please do so. It's going to be great, and it's going to be our first canvas for democracy. And then we're really excited to have another one in Virginia Beach in September, and then a third one for Abigail Spanberger in October. So it's really all about women today, Catherine, and I'm really excited to see everyone and encouraging them to get active on social media, but then get active in person too.
Yeah, you're right. This is today. I mean, it's kind of the equality day. I mean, I think it's not lost on all of us, but it's, but we have to keep fighting, and that's the story. And so I would love to bring up, if you want to stick around with us, but Fennell Norton, our show messenger, I want to talk about equality for a second. Hey, Fennell, come on and get in here with us. Cozy up.
Yeah, I'm cozying up.
You're cozy. There you are, friend. Okay, awesome. I wanted to talk about what this day, what you're thinking. You always have some good thoughts on that, and then we should start we'll play the first round of our inequality game.
Sure, I do have some thoughts about today. So, how unfortunate it is about the Dobbs decision, but what we have to do is we make lemonade out of lemons, and so that's what we're going to do for 2022. And I'm so excited about the guest today because it is something that we've been talking about for a while, and that is democracy. And so what I'm thinking about now is we'll hear the messages today, is that at the end of the day, the right women voting and our base of women will turn this election. And that gives me hope and optimism. So I'm excited. And I'll tell you one other thing that I think is interesting is Sojourner Truth. One of the things that she said, one of the things that she said is, which is really great, is this, that if one woman all by herself could turn the world upside down, then certainly all the women that we have here today that we're going to be listening to can turn it right side up. And so I think that is the notion about women's inequality, is that we're going to make ourselves equal, and we're going to do it in 2022.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to highlight, if we want to pull up the game, but do you want to first show our great banner? Did you get a chance to show the banner for we'll be passing out these postcards. Look at that. Does that make everybody awesome? Super excited? If you want to have access to this, we have it up on our website. You can order it. You can get a postcard with it. We are really in the working group making all kind of great stuff. Dennis, who's in the room, big shout out to Dennis Orsinger. She makes all our graphics, and this is beautiful, and it really makes me excited to get out there and canvas. So let's play some based on Jeopardy, but we're going to be playing the Inequality Day quiz. Now, if you get the question right, Fennell, then we'll bring our big stickers and our swag out to the big canvas in Loudoun for Wexton. And if you get it wrong, we'll bring our big stickers and all our swag out to Wexton. So it's a win-win. All right.
So it's a win-win. So I'm going to get it right. Okay, I'm ready.
Ready? The question is, ready? Uneven access to education, lack of employment equality, job segregation, lack of legal protections, lack of bodily autonomy, poor medical care.
Okay, I think I got this one. What are examples of women's inequality?
Oh, let's see. Answer, Robin. What are examples of women's equality? Very much. You are a winner. Let's hear the winning.
Woo!
Do we have a winning? I don't know. I thought we did, but maybe not. Awesome. There it is. So that's how we're going to play. Well, that's not the bugle, but we'll take it, Robin. Thank you. Well, thank you, Louisa, for the great update and always getting us on our toes to get out the doors and knock and shout and get this work done. So thank you for that, Fanal. Also, let's move on to much anticipated segment of our show, discussion with Dahlia Lithwick. And if you just tuned in, Dahlia, it's great to have you here, making time out for us, and you are just awesome. So let's get this started. I have to say, I love to listen to Amicus. It's my favorite podcast. And I'm just so glad that you have you on, because who better to speak about justice today than you? So let's get this started, and let's begin with some hope and optimism. All right. And then we'll get to the dark side a little later. But your new book out that you had to rewrite, as you told us in the back room 3 times, Lady, Justice, Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America. It's going to be available a couple weeks, so you can pre-order. And this is where you celebrate all the women who fought hard during the Trump years to hold the line. And you saw this need to highlight these sheroes. And then you also were able to see at that time what was really coming at us. You knew that this would be the day where we would see the overturning of Roe. And in this clarion call that you're warning us and telling us about the urgency for us to join this fight. Right now, you're in a room of activists and everyday sheroes fighting the good fight. What do you say, knowing what you know now? How do we balance this feeling of hopeful and continuing this fight for justice?
Well, first of all, Catherine and all of you, thank you for including me. It is so meaningful. For folks who don't know, I lived in Charlottesville for 19 years. So I feel like I'm home talking to you today. And I think at the core of your question is this, and it's exactly the point Fanal just made about democracy work, which is, I think we've been walking around under a set of illusions about, the law is magic, the law is self-reinforcing. As long as we show up to vote every 4 years, everything will work out. And one of the things that the book tries to lift up, and I know Liz's work is going to lift up when she speaks today, is just the notion that none of this stuff does itself. It would be great if it did, right? It would be great if courts just preserve democracy. It would be great if you just couldn't put kids in cages. It would be great if, you couldn't appropriate funds to build a wall after Congress said no. But what we learned, I think, tragically, after the 2016 election is that the law is a bunch of norms and values that are not self-enforcing, and that people need to pick up an oar and row, that everyone has to participate in the work of democracy. And one of the things that the book lands on, it's not an accident, the last 3 chapters in the book are about voting and voting rights and all the stuff we're going to talk about today, gerrymandering and the Independent State Legislature Act and all the things that are making it challenging to vote. But the book also lands in the place of, if it weren't for women just picking up an oar and deciding the Georgia Senate race, we would live in a very, very different world than we live in. And so it is very challenging. I have no illusions. Everything I'm going to tell you today about the Supreme Court is deeply dispiriting. But I also think that, and this is such an apt group to say it to, women have been fighting for equality and democracy for many centuries before they even had a vote. They have been at the vanguard of every fight, whether it was, to end chattel slavery, the fight for the 14th Amendment, the fight finally to get the vote. Women have been at the absolute head of the line. Because we do this work, we do it in our sleep, we just have to do it again.
Yeah, and it's like you said, when you had your I love listening to your podcast, what the Dobbs decision means to me with actor playwright Heidi Schreck. And I really was meaningful to listen to that, because it really talked about looking at the previous generations and how that informs our fight today. And you talk about that just right now. It is women constantly fighting. Fennell brought up Sojourner Truth. It's like, it's constant. And it's kind of annoying that it is sort of like this up and down when it comes to women in the law. So let's get to this a little bit of the darker side. And when we talk about the courts and really how it really feels like something is going on nefarious and this dark actor side of this. And once we saw this, the outcome that many of us expected with Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, what is going on with the court? I mean, what is the backstory here that the Democrats should have seen coming for decades, but chose to maybe ignore? I mean, give us a little bit of the background with all your experience to inform people in the room, what is going on with our courts?
So I think this is really the depressing part of the show, which is, as you say, this is not something that happened in a week or in 5 years. This was a decades-long project to remake, particularly the federal bench, that was undertaken. This goes back to the Lewis Powell memo about how it's just not that hard to get what you want through the judiciary if you can't get it through the elected branches. And then quite literally just decades and decades of work to seat judges on the federal bench. They have lifetime appointments. They cannot be removed. And we're seeing judges who are 35 and 40 who are seated. And to pack the Supreme Court with people who very, very much have a singular worldview. And it's a worldview that is not just animated by reversing Roe, but also by reversing Obergefell and LGBTQ rights, reversing environmental protections, which we saw this past year, really, really taking down the wall between church and state, and all of that stuff. Quite literally, the minute there was a 6-justice majority on the Supreme Court, the minute Amy Coney Barrett was seated, all of that stuff happened. And what's amazing, quite honestly, was that it happened in one term. That people like me, who'd been watching the court for 2 decades, thought that they would be susceptible enough to public opinion. They started 1 year ago, they started the 2021 term, the Supreme Court, with the lowest popularity ratings in the history of Gallup polling. And none of that affected the conduct. What we saw at the end of last term was the most extreme maximalist iteration of kind of a very, very conservative project that was way out of whack with public opinion. And we saw it in every single case. It wasn't 1 or 2 cases. It wasn't just Dobbs, although Dobbs took all the oxygen. It was also guns. It was one thing after another. And so I think the slightly grim answer is this is, the end product of a years-long project to take over not just the courts, but the state courts too, because that's big money pouring into those races too. And I think that in a deep, deep sense, our side was asleep at the switch for much of that.
Yeah. And, it's hard to hear that because you feel like that we have been getting so much done. We put a lot of money in issue advocacy. We seem to be doing all the right things on policy, but I don't know what it is about us that we didn't see the courts and the judges. And even though when we did, a lot of us were kind of annoyed that we didn't feel like we would say, we don't feel like we're fighting hard enough. And then, your article, a really big news dropped today that I don't think a lot of people maybe in the room are aware yet, but speak to this. You wrote an article called "The Scary Part of the 1.6 billion conservative donation" that just came out. And this, for people in the room that don't know about it, it is really about Leonard Leo, who is the charge of the Federalist Society and this dark money. And a lot of people in this room, activists, do money out. We're concerned with money in campaigns, how it affects all of our liberties. Well, what, is it this money and this really power that's going into there? When we say we're asleep at the wheel, is it also because there is just so much dark money going back to Citizens United, let's look at this. Tell us about what you're worried about or what's happening with that drop of money that just went in, and explain to everybody in the room what that is. I'm not doing a very good job of it, but please do.
No, I mean, you're doing a really good job of it. It's hard to believe that there is one person, Leonard Leo, who has almost single-handedly so distorted democracy in ways that begin with Citizens United and turning on the spigot for dark money, but pivot into seating justices on the Supreme Court. He was one of the people who was instrumental in, for the first time ever, Donald Trump publishing lists in advance of pro-life justices that he would seat. That's all Leonard Leo. The campaign to keep Merrick Garland from even getting a hearing or a vote after Antonin Scalia died. Those are dark money groups that were under the sort of auspices of what Leo was doing, that put out just shockingly untruthful ads about Merrick Garland having an anti-gun record, which was simply false. Right. And then, as you've said, in the last few years, very scarily, almost single-handedly, he's been in charge again of dark money groups that are working on vote suppression, which Liz can talk to, but also this most recent iteration of a $1.6 billion drop of funds from somebody who went through an Irish, tax scheme in order to, magnify his own benefit, all of which is in a company that's essentially a shell company. We don't know what it is or what it does, but this is money that Leo and the Federalist Society and other groups spend on seating judges, on winning state Supreme Court races, on blocking Biden judges. And so I think maybe the shortest way to answer your very complicated question is that no one person should have that much power, both to take and raise dark money, to spend dark money, to have no accountability where it goes to, and then to have that money like literally being handed out to groups that are reshaping the courts.
And it seems like since these people and their lawyers involved in our courts and all this, that they know where to poke holes. Like if you're looking down the road and say, what do we need to do to take over something? It seems like you have this group of people poking holes everywhere. And, Citizens United is one of the first big one. And you write about how the legality loop, that all that money has come back, right? Like we're seeing the effects of that today. And I know I read this article by Jamal Green wrote back in 2019 that warned about, the president, Leonard Leo, and what he was doing. And now we see that he has this Marble Freedom Trust going on and all this money that is not accountable. And like you said, the person behind this is this Bear Side. Is that who said Bear Side? Who is Bear Side? And what is his one kind of little man in Chicago? What is his overall goal here?
I mean, I think one of the things that's safe to say is we don't know nearly as much as we should. We know he's not been just involved in some of these dark money groups. He's made millions and millions and millions of dollars that he spent on other groups. He's also spent money on reshaping universities, on making sure that there are, chaired seats at universities. So I think that this is, as you said, goes back to, when Citizens United was decided in 2010, the country hated it. It was one of the most universally hated across the ideological board. Right. The notion that the Supreme Court was just going to let dark money slush around without accountability. And Justice Kennedy, in his opinion, was very careful to say, this is not a problem because we're going to have disclosure. And as long as we have disclosure, we will have sunlight. Well, guess what? There's no disclosure. These groups operate in almost complete darkness. The public hated it. And it kind of goes to your initial question you asked me, and it's useful to really lift this up. The US Supreme Court answers to nobody. It doesn't answer to opinion polls. Citizens United had, 75, 80% of the American people knew it was a bad idea. And in the subsequent years, the court has continued to make it ever easier, not just for dark money to flood the system, but also for a complete lack of disclosure and accountability, often under the rubric of free speech. So what I would just say is, like, if you think part of the original sin here is Citizens United, and that one person can put $1.6 billion in the hand of one other person, and we don't know how it's going to get spent, that goes back to the original sin, which is a Supreme Court that is wholly unaccountable and also wholly not responsive to public will.
Yeah, and I want to get into that accountability piece in a minute here, but I think it's really like important what you're saying for activists in the room. What I noticed with this Leo and this Jones Day group also, that they're after local state races and the state judges, and all of us in this room that, you know, we think about elections, we are definitely working hard, and we see the attack on our schools, and we're seeing this infiltration at the local level, which this Leo seems to be really obsessed with returning our Constitution 85 years back, like rolling it back to this good old days of white supremacist days and so on. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but it kind of freaked me out when I read that Amy Coney Barrett was, like, the next day after overturning Roe, was at this big Jones Day party, all these Federalist Society, and the intertwining of all these, from Dr. Oz to Herschel that's running in Virginia, from Mark Meadows, all these players are all involved in the Republican Party. They're all intertwined, and it just can really overwhelm your brain. Do you have any thoughts about, I mean, that is incredible, the spider web of people involved with these groups.
I mean, again, I think that, and again, you know, our topic today is democracy. And so it's useful to really think through the lens of what are the things that are usurping and warping the democratic will. And I think you've just identified two of them. We have a wildly unpopular set of policy positions, whether it's on guns, whether it's on abortion, whether it's, you know, dismantling worker protections. You can go through the whole list. The environment, none of these issues are close. And yet we're losing on all of them in the courts. And that's because not only are these wildly unpopular groups very powerful, but they're very, very wealthy. And again, because there's no accountability, we don't know where money is coming from or where it's going. I just want to commend the work of Sheldon Whitehouse. If folks are not focused on the work, he's been doing work on dark money, and they spoof him, you know, in the Senate. The Republicans make fun of him as though he's like got some white string board and he's making up everything that he is connecting is a piece of that. I think the one other thing I would just say about Justice Barrett is that this year we have really seen, for the first time, the justices themselves violating the norms of what it is that, and let's be clear, they don't have ethics rules that bind them. They have suggested ethics rules that nothing can be done. But to have Justice Barrett last year fly to the Mitch McConnell Center and fet him, to have Clarence Thomas, flying around the country, going to events when his own wife is implicated in the events of January 6th, to have Samuel Alito giving a speech, by the way, in secret. It was a fight for the press to get coverage of that, and that they don't have any sense that they are supposed to be triangulating by an ethics rule that says that they should preserve the appearance of propriety, is another piece of what's fallen out here. And again, it's another piece of, justices not behaving as though they are unelected and therefore have to answer to a higher authority. So the Jones Day piece is horrifying. Maybe someone can pop it in the chat, but I would just say part of this goes to, finally, we saw attorneys that enabled Donald Trump's lawlessness for 4 years, who didn't obey subpoenas, who would effectuate his worst impulses, and all of them went on to publish books, to have very lucrative gigs at CNN. They went on to have no consequences, including Don McGahn. And I think it's not an accident that Don McGahn, who was his White House counsel, is now representing Lindsey Graham in Georgia. So one piece of the Jones Day story, it's a tiny piece, is that the utter lack of accountability for every single one of the lawyers who participated in efforts, part of which was the coup efforts, that have gone on to continue doing what they're going to do. And I know Liz is going to talk about this, the coup that is kind of rolling towards us in 2024 with the independent state legislature doctrine. Right. But those lawyers having had no accountability for their lawlessness is part of the problem.
Yes. And that's what I'd like to end on with talking about that accountability piece. And I listened to your, there was a great interview on Mary Trump's podcast with the Nerd Avengers, and you were really just eloquent. You were really great at distilling down what everybody was talking about. And you talked about the importance of just having no consequences and what that means. And that people, you basically said, we got to get our heads out of this thing where the system held, because the bad thing that didn't happen, the bad that happened and didn't have any consequences is much worse. That everybody's saying, oh, the system kind of held, the bad thing didn't happen. But you're saying the bad that happened and didn't have any consequences is really what's really much worse. And it's deteriorating the system from the attack on the FBI and these institutions that kind of hold the pieces together. And so let's talk about that accountability and how important it is as we want to survive past the midterms, and we're talking about this battle for democracy.
So I think two pieces, and again, I just want to recognize that I'm like the Grim Reaper on this call, and thank God we've got somebody doing the second half to talk about all the wins. But I would say two things. One is, as I have flicked at, there's a case that's coming before the Supreme Court that raises questions about what's called the independent state legislature doctrine. And if the court, and there's no reason for the court to take this case, it's a preposterous case. The doctrine itself is rooted in nothing. And the court is taking this case in some way to tease out the possibility that state legislatures can have such overweening control over how elections are run that state and federal courts cannot oversee how a state election is run. And if that sounds familiar to folks, that's because that was the Georgia coup. That was the plan for what John Eastman and Jeffrey Clark were thinking that they could pull off in Georgia and Pennsylvania. And the fact that they didn't pull it off, which is huge credit to groups like Liz's that really fought this. But I think we need to understand that the court is now laying down the groundwork to do lawfully with white shoe lawyers who aren't Rudy Giuliani at Four Seasons Landscaping, but like meaningful, serious lawyers from fancy firms are going to advance the arguments that were considered ludicrous, so ludicrous that people were disciplined for making them. And those are going to be advanced this fall in the Supreme Court. And the reason I raise this is because it goes exactly to your accountability piece, that it's very, very, very simple to say, look, the system held. It held because a bunch of bad crackpot lawyers lost 60-some cases on the merits in courts. It won't be bad crackpot lawyers this time. It will be serious, sober lawyers making what sound like plausible, doctrine-rooted arguments at the Supreme Court. And that's the thing I think that we cannot take for granted unless we are prepared, that we cannot take for granted that the quote-unquote system is going to hold. 4 of the 5 conservative justices have already signaled that they would be receptive to these independent state legislature arguments. And if I can just say one other tiny thing, I know it's I'm running out of time, but I think it goes to your accountability point as well. I think we need to just stop and think about the fact that when Sam Alito wrote the Dobbs decision, and much to all of our horror, he had this amazing piece of trolling, right? He said in his opinion that sending it back to the states, quote, allows women on both sides of the abortion issue to seek to affect the legislative process by influencing public opinion, lobbying legislatures, voting and running for office, end quote. And then he just very, very trollishly said, quote, women are not without electoral or political power. But what he, of course, ignores in there is that his own Supreme Court, through cases we've talked about, Citizens United, Shelby County, Brnovich, the gerrymandering cases, have single-handedly made it harder and harder for women to vote, harder and harder, particularly for women of color and poor women to vote in this country. Yes. So the accountability piece has to be to not let him troll us anymore.
Yes. And you know what? And I think we're going to end on a happy note with you, because you're going to play the game Robin's going to bring up. And I hope you're ready to play, Dahlia.
And Fennell just came in. I think Fennell has a quick question before we play the game.
Well, okay.
It'll be really quick. It'll be really, really quick. And you can just think about it, Dahlia, and hopefully you'll stay with us later. But what I would love is, the book is going to be fantastic. I loved hearing everything you said. But I'd like to know just one or two things that everyday people can take away for their understanding about how they take this subject that's really, really big and say, how do you make it so that everyday people can understand the criticality of what's happening here? So you don't have to answer now, but that's what I would love.
No, I'm so glad you asked it, because we were instructed to give action items and I utterly failed to do that. I would say two things, and these are both eminently doable, my friends. One is we have to think in terms of democracy reform. We cannot think just in terms of abortion or just in terms of labor or the environment. We have to say, and every single thing we've talked about, whether it's the Electoral College, gerrymandering, malapportioned Senate, every piece of that, there are very smart people doing the work to fix gerrymandering. There are very smart people trying to fix the Electoral Count Act. Every reason that we live in a minority rule, which goes back to the founding, right? World in which a tiny minority of the country can overmaster the will of majorities is fixable. It's boring democracy repair work. And that is stuff we cannot say, I'm fighting on abortion. We have to do the other piece. The other thing, and this is really, really unpalatable, but we have to talk seriously about court reform. We cannot be afraid to say the word expand the court. We cannot be afraid to say the word term limits. We cannot be afraid to say every other Supreme Court in every other constitutional democracy does not live in thrall to 9 people. And so whether it is doing away with the idea that the court has the last word on democracy itself, doing away with the idea that those justices are seated for life, and if they live to be 90, we live under the thumb of it, no other court operates the way, with complete impunity. So whether it's ethics rules, whether it's court reform, we have to do the thing that, by the way, President Biden had a commission that was supposed to do massive structural court reform. And you all may recall, they came away with like a big shruggy emoji. Yeah. So I think we have to be very brave and bold about not being gaslit that we just don't like this court because we don't like the outcomes. We don't like this court because this isn't democracy.
I think that Supreme Court Term Act is still in the House sitting there, like you said, looking at these different ways to have term limits and kind of, I think those are great action takeaways, because this group loves action. I think those were excellent, but we do want to make sure that we highlight what you were just saying, this positive about our voting. So let's play Women's Inequality Edition. Dahlia, not just Kansas anymore. What is the answer, or should I say the question? Not just Kansas anymore. I'll give you a hint. Tom Bonnier talked about this phenomenon, not just Kansas anymore. Our friend of the show, Tom Bonnier from Target Smart, talked about this phenomena. What would you be, your guess would be the question?
It's something to do with women in ruby red states not sitting around and allowing their rights to be taken away.
Very good. And it is pretty close. What we saw in Kansas is spreading across the country. Women are motivated to vote. and in states, especially with the reproduction rights at risk. And we saw Tom write that article that actually we saw this uptick in registration. I think it was like 70% of all new registrants being women. And we see this meaningful gap happening in Wisconsin and Michigan. So there's the note you said. And with you, what you said, Dahlia, it is up to us. It is up to women and men of this same thought process, but we do see women getting active and getting and making this really big surge and this fight. So thank you. So hopefully you can stick around, and if you can, please do. And the after chat, we're going to be chitty chatting, but I know you want to hear what Liz has to say. So let's get right to that. Does that sound good, Liz? I know you've been sitting there listening. And for people that are new to the room, Liz Frost is a litigation chair and partner at Elias Law Group. Let's just come right out of the gate with that. Tell us about this very important group that maybe people don't know about. And I mean, I was very excited about the work you're doing. Tell us about the Elias Law Group and your mission and what you're about.
Yeah, so I'm super thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is great. And it was wonderful hearing Dahlia, who I've been a fan of for a very, very, very long time. So the Elias Law Group is the first firm of its kind. We are a pro-democracy law firm. We were founded in September of last year. We are, all the lawyers who came over who founded it are political litigation and political law experts. We are probably the most experienced lawyers in the country in this kind of stuff. I want to talk a little bit about what we did in 2020, because I think that is a situation where, fighting back really worked. It was a lot of exhausting, long days, long nights, sort of one neither ending, but it was great. And before actually I get into this, I want to talk actually about something that I talked to my lawyers about. So I am the head of the litigation department at Elias Law Group. We have about roughly, I think, 39 litigators now who are completely devoted to our mission-oriented work. Our mission is, if you are a client of ours, you have to meet one of the following 3 criteria. You don't have to meet them all, but you have to fall into one. And if you don't, we will not work with you. You have to either help Democrats get elected, help citizens vote, or help progressives make change. So we do nonpartisan work, but we do it on the progressive side. Our background, we were sort of recount lawyers first. In the experience of doing recounts and seeing ballots at the table, you really start to see how some of these laws, which you may not think of as obvious voter suppression laws, operate to suppress the votes of large sections of the public. So a lot of our voting rights work grew out of that, where we were seeing ways in which signature matching, for example, which has been referred to, I think there was an article in the Atlantic that called it the witchcraft of election laws. There's experts will tell you no one can do it well, even experts, and certainly elections officials can't do it. I'm originally from an all male voting state, MAIL. We're not at the point of the other kind of all male voting state, but we discovered at some point when I was talking to my mother about what I'd learned about signature matching in my work, that her ballot had been rejected election after election because her signature was being flagged as a mismatch. So when 2020 started, we were originally kind of gearing up, looking at election laws, trying to figure out where voters might find kind of hurdles and trying to address them. Then, of course, the pandemic hits our shores, February 2020, March 2020. Right. And as election lawyers, our first thought is, oh no, mail voting is a great innovation, but it also disenfranchises certain voters, particularly when they're new to it. And so we started looking at 4 issues. We look at signature matching. We were very worried about that. And in fact, in past elections, thousands of ballots had been rejected because of signature matching issues. There is no indication those are actually fraudulent ballots. They're voters like my 70-something-year-old mother, who's signed her, voting card 30 years ago, and now her signature doesn't match. We actually looking at postage. A lot of Americans don't keep stamps at home anymore, particularly younger Americans. And studies have shown that actually when, like King County in Washington State now does, when you prepay postage, it actually helps voter turnout quite a bit. We were looking at ballot delivery. We didn't yet know the way the Postal Service would effectively collapse on this front, but we were worried about things getting stuck, about there's large segments of the population in Arizona, for example, on Native American reservations where the US mail doesn't deliver there. You have one person who sort of drives back and forth once a week. In some states, that's illegal for that person to take their ballot to return it. So we were looking at those kinds of issues. So we geared up, we called these kind of the 4 pillars, and we geared up with some pro-voting litigation in that sense. And then we started to see something we've never seen before. And that was Trump and the Republican Party started to bring cases suing states with voter-friendly laws, trying to make it harder for voters to vote in these states. So to give you some examples, we saw the Trump campaign, the RNC, the New Jersey Republican Party, they sued in New Jersey because the governor made voting accessible to all voters in COVID, vote by mail accessible to all voters. We saw similar things in Montana, the RNC again there, in Pennsylvania, the Trump campaign and the RNC, all trying to make it harder for voters to vote. And this is the point too, right, where suddenly drop boxes become public enemy number one. Prior to this, drop boxes were actually a very bipartisan approved method of returning your ballots. Probably in part because until 2020, more Republicans voted by mail than Democrats. Now in COVID, you see that shift, right? Because everyone is looking to this suddenly. And suddenly you see all of these methods for being able to access the ballot are suddenly being decried as vehicles for voter fraud and without evidence. And so we were actually litigating these issues before you even get to the election. And they were running the same theories that we would then see from Trump and friends in the post-election, which is voter fraud without evidence. They had this theory, which is kind of, I think it's particularly upsetting in that it adopts the language of civil rights litigation to say their votes are being diluted because, and again, it connects this idea that real American voters are going to have their votes like count less because other voters are going to be accessing the system. Again, no evidence of it.
No evidence, right.
And over and over again, we won those cases. We would intervene on behalf of our clients. We win those cases. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when you talk about the cases leading out of what out of the 65 cases with the Trump?
This is prior even to that.
This is prior even to that. So we're talking building up to that. Okay, then we'll get to that. I mean, how important is what your group is doing? This is what our group really cares about, gerrymandering. We first got in, we met Brian Cannon, who did the whole, we watched our first gerrymandering video like it was sex education. We're like, what's this about? How does this happen? And I mean, really 6 years ago, and we all woke up to this idea, and it's so important because like we said, the nefarious people that are bringing these cases are the same people Dahlia and I were speaking about. They're funded by these same actors, right?
Yeah, one of the things that's been really interesting, I think, in frankly the post 2020, is we've seen a lot of these lawyers who kind of assisted Trump and drove some of these theories are now running what they're calling nonpartisan election integrity organizations. And there's so many of them now, it's almost impossible to keep track. We see a new one every day. And so to give you an example of some of the funny stuff they're doing is, for example, there's a voting case that's now being heard by the 11th Circuit. And one of the things that happens often on appeal in these cases is you'll get what are called amicus or friend of the court briefs from other interested parties, right? And what we saw there is, I think it was a total of 6 of these quote unquote nonpartisan election integrity organizations, often with these same lawyers, that we saw in 2020, signing the briefs on behalf of like the Honest Elections Project is one of them. And there's a bunch of these organizations. And so they're sort of creating, it's almost like this AstroTurf world of like, look at all of these people who feel so strongly that the plaintiffs should lose these voting rights cases when it's this sort of same network.
Are these like nonprofit groups too? Are they C3s and C4s? Are they funding this money through there too? Like,
so there, I don't know enough about,
I'm just curious.
exactly
Yeah.
how that's really not totally my department. They do represent themselves in these briefs as nonpartisan organizations.
Yeah. Well, we see this in other areas, right? I feel like there's so much not accountability, and these groups that come up, even with the school stuff we're experiencing, same ideas. They form groups, they call themselves nonprofits, but they're really out for disinformation. But I digress. So let's get to the part where you see the real attack after January 6th. You must have been like the rest of us, just just watching this unfold, right? But you're a group, Elias Group, and this to me, you're a hero, a quiet. It's really hard to even find information on your group. You guys put your head down. You're in the courtroom and you're working hard. But yeah, Dahlia's you're going to be in the next edition of her book, because you definitely are really saving our democracy, working on the very important obstacles we're against. So then the election, there's this election lie, and you must have been busier than shit, as we say. I mean, just busy.
Yeah, so we were hired by the Biden campaign to be ready for any post-election litigation. And again, this is kind of like a real break from we are often hired by Democratic presidential campaigns, Senate campaigns, congressional campaigns to be ready for potential recounts if there is one. It doesn't mean anyone actually expects there will be one, but it's just you have to kind of be ready to go. Most years, we might deploy lawyers to a couple states. Usually then it evaporates by the time the dust settles and everyone kind of goes home and you're done. Here, of course, it was very different. We saw in the post-election 64 cases brought by Trump and friends on all kinds of theories as to why the elections in various different states were invalid, or there were issues with ballots. To give you a sense, in Michigan, Trump and his allies filed 6 suits seeking to stop ballot counting or certification. 9. I read that upside down. In Wisconsin, it was 7. In Arizona, it was also 7. And my memory of that is at least 2 and maybe 3 of those all centered around this completely insane theory that called Sharpiegate, that was dubbed Sharpiegate. And in fact, we all called it that. But in fact, even I think the judges started calling that. And there was this theory, basically, as far as I could tell, invented by a Republican lawyer in Arizona, that voters were being given Sharpies to mark their ballots, and those ballots were not being counted, which never had any facts anywhere. But we saw one lawsuit, we saw another, we saw another. We saw several election contests in that state, all I think involving the state Republican Party there. Nevada, we saw 8 different lawsuits. Georgia, we saw 10.
Wow.
And in Pennsylvania, we saw 15.
Oh yeah, Pennsylvania's, yeah. I think they're still, having fights. And let's talk about what's happening now. Your work is so important. And in the last couple weeks and months, we've seen some real wins. So let's talk about the positive. Your Arizona or Ohio, where we've seen some fights where actually it's worked out for the positive for the voter. So let's talk a few of those. Yeah, because this is really interesting about what the cases we should be watching.
Yeah, so I think so one thing I want to point you all to, if you're not familiar with it, is we have a sister website called Democracy Docket. And that's something that actually was set up by the founder of my law firm, Mark Elias, actually in 2020, largely as we were sort of keeping score. So the public could see what was happening with each of these cases, had a location they could go to, they could see the filings, they could see a summary. And Democracy Docket, I think we actually just published something the other day that actually talked about how the redistricting cycle this year was actually very good for voters at the end of the day. There are a lot of maps that frankly were not as bad as they could have been. There were a lot of maps where seats were protected and voters, and when I say that, what I mean is that the voting, the way that voters kind of shake out in the states was reflected in the map, so that they have an actual opportunity to elect their representatives. And, we're continuing to do voting litigation. And so like a great example of this is Pennsylvania. where recently there were some issues about whether if a voter, when you fill out your affidavits on your ballots, right, there's a bunch of different things to fill out. If you neglect to write the date into it, or if you neglect to write, another piece of something, but it's obvious, right, it's postmarked before election day, it's obvious the ballot is valid in every single way, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is going to count those ballots. That was a real, kind of up in the air thing. And it's another great example of the way in which we're seeing the Republican Party try and make all of these little steps so that just like totally innocent errors mean that your ballot is thrown out. But that's
securing your ballot. Remember, like they even are making it so you can't. So if you do make a mistake, you can chase down people. We've all done it in our work here. And then they're actually going after, no, you can't contact the voter. I mean, they're just covering everything, right?
Yeah. And this is, that's one of those things where like chase and cure is very specific in each state. And you're seeing like little efforts to tweak it here and there. One thing we saw in Kansas last year, which was weird, was a prohibition on sending out forms to voters so that they could, request their absentee ballots. I think all of these like little things, when you're thinking about like action items, really understanding the way that voting works in your state, and helping to educate your friends and neighbors and other people about those things, because a lot of the stuff, gets stymied with really good voter education. The problem is really good voter education is really, really hard to do.
No, right. And I noticed too, this one case that caught my eye, because a lot of us work on campaigns here, is this texting. This one court case, I don't know if it's still pending, that campaigns may have lost their most effective and annoying outreach tool. Texting voters just got harder, and your firm got involved with that. Can you tell us about that? So
that is actually not in my, that's the more sort of, we have two sides of our practice. One we call political law, which is kind of the more regulatory version, but we do have an article about that on Democracy.com.
Yeah. Okay, good. I think I would say that I know that Robin put that link in there. Well, it's the last thing before I let you go, especially when we're thinking about what Dahlia said, that independent state legislature doctrine. We talked about that. What is your opinion on that? And then also in the room, what some takeaways you can give to the activists in the room of how we can, take action on protecting our democracy. But what's your opinion on this lawsuit?
Yeah, so I mean, the independent state legislature doctrine is a fringe theory, as Dahlia said. It has been peddled by truly fringe right-wing actors for decades, and it's been rejected repeatedly. So this is not against a blank slate, which I think is something that is hopeful. It's also so fundamentally opposed to our system of government. I mean, Marbury v. Madison says the courts decide what the law is, and here you're talking about state courts deciding what state law is. So I think that's something also that's in the column of there's hopefulness here. It's also, there's an interesting tension now between the folks who are pushing this doctrine and their whole pro-states' rights view, because it would be stripping from state judiciaries like very profound central rights to the separation of powers. And finally, I mean, there was a case, Rucho, where the Supreme Court, found that you couldn't bring partisan gerrymandering claims in federal courts. But, the Chief Justice wrote that opinion, and he said that there's a line in it about how, but state courts are still available. So I think there's very strong arguments here. And I feel like it's, we have a great arguments here. I think it's obviously one to watch. It's obviously one that people are paying a lot of attention to, and they should be. But there is, I think, a lot of background here that means that I don't think this is decided by any means.
No, but if the Supreme Court takes a case, which, like Dahlia said, is the worrisome thing, right? Like they would usually maybe not ignore it. We've seen so many things where you say they never do that, and then they do it, or they actually just let things sit. And just like the SB 8 law in Texas, a lot of people were horrified at the cruelty that they just sat there and said, we don't care, right, if this goes on. So we'll see.
But
Yeah.
sometimes they take stuff and then they end up not deciding it on the merits. We had several redistricting cases a couple cycles ago that
Love
they
your
took.
optimism, right?
Well, and then we won them all.
There you go. I love it.
And not, I don't think that not everyone thought we were going to win them all, and we did.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of never over till it's over. Queen's Gambit, as long as you have a live.
Yeah, as long as you're in the fight, and it's so great that you are. And I don't know, Fennell, if you have any questions. If not, jump in, Fennell. And we want to make sure that you get to play our inequality Jeopardy today, because if you get it right, we'll bring our swag out and our stickers. If you get it wrong, we're going to still bring our swag and stickers. So how about that? And the question is, it is about women in education. Since 2014, since 2014, who has consistently graduated college in larger numbers whilst carrying the most student debt?
I mean, I would guess, who are women?
Yes, very good. Who are women, and more even, especially Black women, right? So thank you for playing, and you won swag and stickers for the big equality democracy canvas. So thank you, Liz. It's been great to have you here with us. It's really our pleasure to have both of this ladies speaking about justice, and just continue the fight. And any last takeaways before about what people can do, Liz, before we let you go?
Yeah, so I actually sort of meant to start here, and then I apologize, I got off track. So what I always tell, we have kind of a saying here, which is, yes, the arc bends towards justice, but only if you push it there. And I think a lot about, and I talk to my lawyers about this a lot, about the civil rights lawyers who walked into courtrooms for decades with no hope they were going to win. But they still got up, they still made the best cases they could, they still made their presentations, and they did it. I think part of what is very hard about this moment is that we've seen another kind of reality, right? So,
right.
But that is, I mean, I think about this all the time. If those lawyers can do it, I owe it to them to keep getting up and doing that. And I think that's true about all of us. And I will tell you this, litigation is not going to save democracy. We are one piece of this.
Of it.
And exactly like Dahlia said, we all have a role in this. And we help make space for voters. We help protect the right to vote, right? But at the end of the day, voters need to show up. And I think that the Kansas issue, the way voters showed up in Kansas was incredibly exciting. I actually was going to mention the statistics that Tom has been talking about young women in particular registering after Dobbs. I think that is just thrilling. And I think people just need to vote in numbers they can't ignore. This is just, our work is a part of the story, but we all have to realize, like, the system held, but that wasn't inevitable. And every day we got to push back. No,
right. And I think that is why they're going after voting so much. We are the key. And when voters speak, we come out, and it will definitely make a difference. And this is why this is the effort to just look at every single way to disenfranchise us. So thank you so much for coming in the room. Liz, it's great. I hope we stay in touch. We're so thrilled you're here, and some of your partners, I think, are in the room. So that's awesome. So I want to wrap up with not missing out, talking about the work that we do. And that is that we are busting butt to make sure that we get our 3 women, the congresswomen, back in office, because we will protect our democracy that way. So we have been doing the Women's Summit. We did the Rural Summit. We just got back from that only 2 weeks ago. And we're going to be heading to Virginia Beach coming up. So let's show Virginia Beach. There we go. Virginia Beach. We're all in to win our last and third stop on the festival all in, September 16th and 18th. Down there to knock doors for Elaine Luria. Friday night, we're going to be at the Shack on 8th. Come join us. Make sure we're putting the links in there if you want to see the itinerary. And Saturday, we're going to be at the Museum of Contemporary Art and the cool Vibe District in Virginia Beach. If you've ever been down there, we will be down there that morning. We will have the advocacy fair partners with us. We're going to have a great stage and speakers. And then it's going to be all about getting out the vote. We'll be canvassing, we'll be postcarding, we'll be even doing some walking tours for those who weren't interested for that afternoon to do a few things. We'll have it ready for you. And then that evening, we're going to go to Smart Mouth Brewery and have some fun there. We're going to have calling all candidates, so candidates that want to come speak. But the key to this is, if you want to get into action, you're a candidate, you're elected, you bring a team of people to canvass. We really need everybody to go on all in. You know, a lot of people said to me so many months ago, oh, Elaine doesn't really have a chance. We're going to concentrate over here. But what we have done well in this room, what Network Nova and the grassroots have done, is we do not give up on anybody. And that's how we flipped the damn state. We said we can do it all. And it really takes us getting on the doors and working together. So that is Virginia Beach. So thank you. I'm going to do the wrap up and then we'll roll credits. So I want to thank Dahlia and Liz for being here. And remember that show us the love. If you want to become a patron, you like what you see, please support our show. We love it. Subscribe to all our social media, and we do this awesome recap that comes to you in your email if you're registered, and you don't have to really worry about all those links. It's going to come to you later today. How awesome is that? And then stay for the after chat. That's all the fun that we love to have together. And if our guests can stay, great. You may be able to ask them some questions in the after chat. That would be super. And I want to say thank you to the team that puts the show together. Robin Warner, our show wizard, Stare Calhoun, the ambassador of buzz, Vanell Norton, the show messenger, Heidi Dragneff, social media diva, and of course our crew. We have Laura Martinez. It's always great letting people in the room, and our newcomer chat liaison, Michelle McKinney. And thank you to our content concierges, Julie Galdo, Elvina McCall, and Sally Reynolds. And most of all, remember, we won't be here for Labor Day, but we will be laboring for democracy, and we will be back September 9th with the best crew with Ginny Diamond on labor and a bunch of great people talking about how we're going to make sure that we will get the workers' rights out. So thank you. Love you all, and hope to see you on the other side of the after chat.